Armour was improved in the most recent Path of Exile 2 patch, and we didn't really get the specifics on that, so I wanted to do a bit of my own testing to find out exactly what the new Armour formula was. So here we are. I'm on an Infernalist character right here, and the reason why I'm using an Infernalist is because the Infernalist has a node called Pyromantic Pact, and what this node does is basically replaces your normal mana pool with Infernal Flame. And Infernal Flame pretty much flips the idea of mana on its head. Instead of beginning with a full mana pool and you spend mana and you slowly deplete mana, you instead begin with an empty mana pool, and whenever you spend mana, you actually gain Infernal Flame, and then whenever you reach maximum Infernal Flame, you will take maximum life and energy shield as fire damage, and that comes in one full fire damage hit. And that's important because that gives us a way to be able to test armor, since there's a node on the tree called Heatproofing, which applies 25% of armor to fire damage taken from hits. So the way this node works here is that the actual hit that comes in is a combined life and energy shield in total. So right now I have 1,632 life and 485 energy shield, which means I have a total of 2,117 life and energy shield combined, so that's going to be the size of the fire damage hit whenever I reach maximum Infernal Flame. So I've set up this character here with some reduced mana stuff so that I'm able to easily get to maximum Infernal Flame. I have an ability right here, Flame Wall, which costs me 40 Infernal Flame and I have 36, so whenever I use this, I'll always hit that maximum and it will always cause that same hit. So right now, as you could see there, I don't have Heatproofing allocated, and so we can test exactly how much damage this is doing to us. And on this character, I have 74% fire resistance. So when I use this, we can see how much damage I take. Right there, I got ignited, so we'll do the test again. Okay, so it depleted all of my energy shield, left with 1,567 life. So that is without Heatproofing specs, and that is correct there, because the hit is 2,117, which when mitigated by fire resistance of 74% would bring the hit down to 550, which removes all of my energy shield of, 485 there, and then deals 65 damage to life, bringing life down to 1,567. So that's correct. There's nothing weird going on. The fire damage hit is the right amount, which means that we can then use it to test Heatproofing and see how much the armor mitigation is actually applying. So let's spec into Heatproofing now. And we can refresh. There we go again. So this time, all of our energy shield is depleted. We end up with 1,573 life. So a little bit more life there, not much more. And so what we can do is we can actually calculate that and work out exactly what the formula is. We know that in Path of Exile 2, armor is applied before resistances when it comes to elemental damage. So I assumed that from the patch notes, the formula was going to be adjusted from armor divided by armor plus 12 multiplied by hit damage to armor divided by armor plus 10 multiplied by hit damage. And that's exactly what it is. We can actually verify that with the number of 1,573 life. So right now I have 958 armor on this character, and 25% of that is 239.5, which is the armor that's being used to mitigate fire damage. So the formula then would be 239.5 divided by 239.5 plus 10 multiplied by 2,117, which gives us approximately a reduction of 1%. That's the amount of damage that's actually being prevented by armor, which would come out at about 23 damage. So the 23 damage gets removed from that 2,117, which leaves us with 2,094, and then the 2,094 is then mitigated by resistances, bringing it down to 544, and that means that 544 removes all of our energy shield, and then it removes 59 life, leaving us with 1,573. So that is the formula. Armor divided by armor plus 10 multiplied by hit damage. So, TLDR then is that Armour is better, but still bad. And I wanted to kind of take the end of this video here to discuss Armour a little bit and what I think of the whole situation with Armour and why I think GGG didn't really do much with Armour in this patch. So, the reason why I think that they didn't kind of go ham and, buff the mechanic big time like everyone expected them to is because they probably want to think more about fundamental balance before they actually get into buffing these mechanics. Because if they go into the game and they buff this to be really significant, for example, if they made the formula what it is in PoE 1 right now, then they may have to then revert that change later on, and players are not going to be happy with that. They'd be better off to actually slowly improve this by, small increments in the meantime, and then when it comes to looking at fundamental balance, they may have to shift some other things around, because the problem with Armour is not an isolated issue. It's actually a lot broader in scope. It's not just that Armour's bad, it's that Armour is directly related to life, because that's kind of on the side of the tree where you build Armour and you build life, and right now life is in a very bad place compared to energy shield. So there's a big problem there where realistically a character that's speccing into life is probably going to reach around 3,000 or 4,000, with good gear, without any kind of heavy investment into actually stacking life. And a character with energy shield is going to be much closer to 10,000 energy shield with a similar investment. And obviously both of those mechanics help to mitigate damage in an equal way, or an almost equal way. And so there's a really, really big problem there right now between life and energy shield. And Armour is kind of caught up in that problem. It's not just that Armour's bad, it's that it's stuck in between this problem of life versus energy shield. And you have to kind of think about when you're scaling Armour on your gear, when you actually take pieces of gear that have armour on them, armour bases, every time you actually use an armour base, that means that you're not using an energy shield base, right? So you're immediately competing with energy shield whenever you equip a piece of gear that grants armour, and that means that right now in the current balance, that is essentially a wasted slot, because you could have just had more effective life instead of having a smaller amount of mitigation that only works for physical hit damage. So that's another problem right now, is that scaling Armour competes directly with energy shield, and energy shield is simply superior right now in the current balance. But there's more problems than just that. It's not just there's kind of this competition going on between scaling Armour versus stacking energy shield and how bad life is and things like that. It's also that the reservation skills that grant armour and evasion are a bit problematic. So evasion right now is a stat in the game which is very, very effective at mitigating damage, because there's a really big problem going on in the end game in Path of Exile 2 right now, where monsters that are not particularly threatening, or not supposed to be particularly threatening, are dealing far too much damage. White monsters are hitting like trucks. They are doing way too much damage. They're doing similar damage to boss slams. You can easily die to just a few hits from normal white monsters, and that means that mitigating damage through something like Armour is much, much worse than just avoiding it altogether through something like evasion. And so you've got this comparison here between Scavenged Plating and Wind Dancer, and this is a really big problem. You've got Scavenged Plating here, which was actually buffed in the most recent patch. The way how this skill works is that you must break enemies' armour to be able to stack this Scavenged Plating buff up, and it grants you more armour per stack. And it's quite a sizable amount of more armour. You get even more there from the quality stat as well. But the problem is, this buff is tied behind you breaking enemies' armour. So you actually have to add that to your build to be able to benefit from this Scavenged Plating buff, to be able to get more and more armour there. You must interact with the armour break mechanic. Meanwhile, for evasion, you can just slap Wind Dancer onto any build that's using a martial weapon, and you passively gain more evasion rating just by existing, right? You just turn this buff on, and every 1.5 seconds, you gain a stage, and you get more evasion rating. So that is a huge problem between these two buffs here. One does not equal the other. There's no kind of parity here between the two. Wind Dancer is simply superior. Aside from the fact that you have to be using a martial weapon, of course, on this buff is simply superior in every way to Scavenged Plating. And Scavenged Plating did get changed this patch to make it so that the rarity of the monster is important in terms of how much you gain out of this skill. So when you're breaking the armor of a unique boss, for example, you gain the maximum 10 stacks immediately, which means that you can theoretically break the armor of a boss and then consume that armor break and then break it again, and you can always keep 10 stacks up in a boss fight. But once again, you must interact with the armor break mechanic. You don't have a choice. If you want to scale your armor like crazy, this is the only buff in the game that scales your armor. It gets really high. It's like 70% more when you have quality at level 20 gem, when you have all 10 stacks. So you don't really have a choice about using this. If you want to stack armor, you must use Scavenged plating, which means you must interact with the armor break mechanic, which is obviously a problem in and of itself. While Wind Dancer, you know, you can just use this, no problem, and you just passively gain that evasion rating. So there's another problem with armor, another loss for armor. So overall then, armor is still in a bad place even with this change, and I'm going to reserve my judgment a little bit until the next big patch, because we know that the next big patch that's coming is going to ship with a full economy reset, whenever that may be, whether it's the end of February or middle of March or whenever it is, we're not sure just yet. But we know that it's going to ship with an economy reset and likely a giant balance patch, which is going to fundamentally change a lot of the core principles of the game right now. There's a lot of things that need to be addressed. The GGG have a ton of work to do when it comes to balance. And, well, I don't envy them, because there's a lot of things to work out exactly what's best to do with them. And I think that realistically, there's not a great solution right now for the life versus energy shield and armor problem. So we'll see what they get on to doing with that. Thanks for watching this video, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.